Words are but symbols. Words are but
symbols for the relations of things to one another and to us. Nowhere do they touch upon absolute truth. Friedrich Nietzsche. How we organize reality conditions the way we think things exist, relate, and work. We humans organize reality by creating human-friendly conceptual units, words, out of the information we are capable of acquiring and sometimes producing. Both of these are shaped by our senses, lifespan, scale, along with many physical and neurological capabilities, basically our biology. But this causes for an interesting situation between humans and our words, for words are restricted by us, and we are restricted by them, raising the question, how accurately do our words reflect the reality we have them organize? Are words real? So this is definitely a complex topic. In order to keep the video organized, this video is going to be broken up into 3 major sections. Units, why and how we use them, words and definitions, how do they work, and what issues can all of this cause? So without further ado, let's investigate. So first things first, we need to ask ourselves, why units? Words. Why must we break up reality into conceptual units in the first place? If you're not specific enough, you could find yourself generalizing and oversimplifying complex things simply because they share a label. And if you're too specific, sometimes you can become overwhelming and impractical. And surely this could come at odds with properly representing things that don't really exist in units, like time. You know, not so simple stuff. But it seems that in our quest for communication, we really didn't have many options. Unfortunately, we can't just telepathically communicate to share knowledge and experiences as they happened, as awesome as that would be. That information has to be converted into a medium that can somehow be expressed and received by our bodies, and we've actually utilized many of our options. Capitalizing on useful senses, movement, and critical thinking, we've created numerous systems for complex communication, from spoken language to written language, sign language, fingerspelling, Morse code, binary, and even creating programs like Equalizer that give Stephen Hawking a voice. All of these work by forming units, making them technically capable of expressing almost any language. And this is something our brains are hardwired for. Making words, understanding words, we are natural experts when it comes to applying symbolism to technically meaningless things. Which is why we can communicate with particular sounds, gestures, and movement that mean nothing without it. What this tells us is that words are a product of us, being capable of existing in a variety of forms that complement our physiology, allowing us to go beyond just the verbal variety because we can apply meaning to things. And this makes it possible for many people around the world to organize and discuss reality through units made possible with hand signs and/or touch, for instance. A remarkable case over how amazing the human brain is in this context can be found with that of Helen Keller. An amazing woman who is both blind and deaf, yet managed to organize and discuss the reality around her through touch, specifically that of fingerspelling. This involves spelling each word out individually with particular hand signs that are felt by another person. Where I have the sound sun to represent my understanding of that giant star in the sky, she would have had the somatosensory sensation of 3 individual hand signs to represent that single word that would have looked something like this. S-U-N. S-U-N. Sun. Her whole understanding of reality, understood through individually felt letters. And as you can see here, they can actually be quite fast at it. That said, what makes her case extraordinarily interesting is that Helen actually learned how to speak verbally. With this being an actual video of her demonstrating, she used her hands to feel out the vibrations of the throat and the movement of the lips, to not only use that to read what people were saying within itself, but also to actually learn to verbally communicate beyond all expectation. Here is a quick video.
It is not blindness or deafness that brings me my darkest hours.
It is not blindness or deafness that bring me my darkest hours.
It is the attitude that I put meant in not being able to speak normally.
It is the acute disappointment in not being able to speak normally.
The fact that her brain was not only able to mimic verbal communication with a very limited means of acquiring information over it, but also remember it, associate the sound-based words with the touch-based words she already understood, and then reproduce it all, is absolutely incredible. But with all that said, I feel it's important to point out that language is not the same thing as thought. Psychologist and linguist Steven Pinker has an amazing video over linguistics which I highly recommend to anybody. He briefly discusses that even though people often state that they think in terms of words, thought does not require words or language. A quick example for you would be just mentally rotating an object in your mind, or just imagining you're doing an activity of some sort. It should also be mentioned that deaf people often state they primarily think of things using imagery alone. Words are tools. They're used to organize and share thought, but not to have thought within itself. So with all the different communication systems for making words and subsequently languages, there seems to be something going on in terms of the types of words we have being so inherently compatible with practically every person. Even with all the differences in terms of how they are produced, there still seems to be a deeper relationship between us and our words. This is where famed linguist Noam Chomsky's contributions to universal grammar come into play. It discusses how genetics play a significant role as to why all humans not only have a drive to understand the world through words, something naturally selected for, but also how all languages share particular types of words, such as adjectives, nouns, verbs, along with lexical and functional words, to name a few. Even critics over aspects of universal grammar, such as Morton Christensen and Nick Chater, have still proposed that language has been shaped to fit the human brain, and in many respects, both positions make sense. The types of words we have developed out of what the early human brain was biologically conditioned to be capable of comprehending. Our cognitive capacity to understand information from our senses, movement, scale, spatial awareness, the passing of time, and experiencing life from a single perspective had existed long before complex communication ever did. These systems, in light of a unit-based communication system, were the factors that influence the types of words we have today. Verbs, nouns, etc. Now, one could certainly ask, what types of words would we need if we had the ability to experience reality in more ways than our biology can allow? But that would go way off topic, so maybe another day. What we can ask ourselves is, when considering the types of words we do have, how are we then making our vocabulary? How complex can a unit, a word, be, and what really goes into making a definition? Well, a word is, by definition, a single distinct conceptual unit of language comprising inflected and variant forms. That's rather vague, and intentionally so to cover its bases, being technically correct but not really providing much context over the diversity and even conflicts in terms of what can be considered a word. So in order to better understand words, we need to know about the morpheme, the smallest meaningful unit of language. How it's used in word creation within particular languages can complicate things. In English, most of the words we use contain a single morpheme, but we do have many that contain more than one, such as the word unacceptable, which contains 3 morphemes: un, accept, able, meaning not able to accept. That might seem simple enough, but when taking into consideration how morphemes are treated within other languages, truly understanding what a word is and supposedly just encompasses as a unit itself can be, well, complicated. Some languages like that of Cherokee can create words by combining numerous morphemes together to create one large single word, behaving much like a sentence. One that doesn't really make sense if you were to take all the morphemes apart. On the other hand, there are some languages that have practically no words that are a result of combining morphemes, like Chinese. Each word almost always has a single morpheme within it. So in the context of languages like Cherokee, you can create a single word with a lot of information within it. In Chinese, you could still get the same amount of information across, only that you will have to use many words to do so. So depending on the language you are taking into consideration, the amount of information that can be in a single word can range quite greatly, and this can subsequently make definitions extremely elaborate for some words. Does this make some languages better in terms of describing things? Arguably no. Maybe some are easier to learn or use for certain people, are more convenient in certain situations, or make more sense in the culture they originate from. But you're still always working with units like morphemes, even if they're distributed differently among words within a language. So this then brings us to the final part of this section: the definitions. So considering everything previously mentioned, we make words to talk about things. What brings rise to the existence of particular terminology can be extremely different considering all the factors involved in the human experience, including, but not limited to, culture, geography, isolation, religion, trade, scientific understandings, line of work, the influence of pre-existing terminology, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Especially when you involve a historical context too. This often brought rise to opportunities for people to expand upon their vocabulary, and frequently shaped definitions to satisfy the situations they found themselves in. Due to this, it's not uncommon to find the word used in different languages to describe the same thing encompass different components in its definition than can be found in the other languages. This can even be true for different regions where the same language is spoken. Because of all this, especially if you include figures of speech, translating can be a tremendous challenge. Google Translate is far from perfect, and it's because of all these inconsistencies that can be found throughout different languages. Here are 4 different examples over situations we can find ourselves in. In English, the is always gender neutral, but in many languages, like that of the Romance languages, there is a masculine and feminine form. So the English word doesn't have as much information in that context. Though studies do show there really isn't much of an advantage with or without it. In American English, a trunk can be the body of a tree or the storage space of a vehicle. In Commonwealth English, a boot is a type of footwear or a storage space of a vehicle too. So this can cause problems communicating with each other, as well as translating into other languages without context. In English, the word enemy and soldier are 2 relatively separate constructs with independent etymological origins. In the language of Quechua from Western South America, the word aka and akak mean enemy and soldier respectively. The etymological origin and historical association between the words is much more strongly intertwined in a way they aren't really in English, implying a different context but rise to the existence of the words. And lastly, you have the word Schadenfreude, a German word that roughly means to enjoy the misfortunes or harm of others. There is no true English translation, but fortunately, as we discussed before, I can use multiple words to express it. I just don't have a single word to represent it. So definitions are messy. The existence of particular words is often conditioned by the history of the people they come from. And if they come from other languages, you need to take that into context as well. So words and everything involving them from definitions to figures of speech within languages are extremely valuable tools when it comes to understanding a people.
But what about reality itself?
Reality is a state of things as they actually exist. That being said, discovering, understanding, and adjusting for how things actually exist has become a massive challenge for humanity, and a significant reason for this discussion over the reality of words. The origin of complex communication is rooted in the need to share information with other humans in order to survive, maintain, and excel. The biological systems that would be incorporated into complex communication would go on to be strongly selected for, shaping particular characteristics over what we would become, anatomically, socially, etc. This is where everything mentioned in the video thus far comes into play. Our brains are biologically conditioned for a sophisticated level of symbolic comprehension and production, allowing us to make words in a number of ways. The types of words we have were shaped by how we experience life through aspects of our biology, which explains why all languages share the same fundamental types of words. From there, taking into context all the different situations people have found themselves in throughout history, we find the rise of vibrant terminology in languages that are quite different from each other in terms of how words are made and what is incorporated into a definition. All of this in order to organize reality, something accomplished by interpreting the information we are able to acquire. But with all of that, this raises the question, are words real? Our words, in the sense that they accurately organize and represent reality as it actually exists? Or do they just represent reality as we humans personally experience it, and not necessarily how it actually exists within itself? Well, the answer is a bit complex, but it plays off of the information we've already discussed. We live in an age built off the backs of our ancestors. Much of what our languages, cultures, societies, and even us as a species itself have amounted to today is based upon the perspectives, needs, accomplishments, and beliefs of those who came before us. Like those who came before us, we share practically the same biology, particularly if we're looking at just humans. and have the ability to reason and acquire information over things much like they did in their own times. But where we can find ourselves in a difficult situation is when we question what they, always thought was right. In the context of words, what we thought describes something as it actually exists, as it seems to make sense. And such situations are happening more frequently as we find ourselves with the ability to acquire information over things in ways that our biology can't do alone, in ways those who came before us couldn't or didn't do, thus potentially forcing us to reconsider aspects of the human experience. Now, of course, there will always be terminology that is almost purely conceptual, that relies on us and what we want or need them to mean. And there can definitely be conflicts found within this, like naming something after a term and then trying to subsequently control its definition based on what that something is trying to accomplish. I'm intentionally being vague here. But having a means of communication that is so intertwined with our biology makes it easy to hold a bias against particular words or potential changes to their definitions, if they're done through means where individuals can't personally justify, acquire information for themselves, or simply reproduce. But the truth of the matter is we all want our words that are used to organize reality to do so as accurately as possible, especially when it comes to organizing things in nature, for instance. But often the biggest hurdle in doing so can be us. If how we reorganize things and subsequently their words invokes an emotional response, or challenges the worldview of individuals who are not willing to accept anything different, things can get ridiculous. I mean, for a relatively simple and recent example, just look at the whole Pluto debate. Reclassifying Pluto as a dwarf planet was just to more accurately describe the properties of objects like Pluto. And people were up in arms over it, and it wasn't even that really big of an issue. I mean, many of the same scientists also suggest that we should reclassify Earth as not a planet, considering how different we are from objects like Jupiter. And I'm sure the reaction to that would be nothing but civil. But I mean, just imagine the conflicts that can arise when there is more on the line. And hopefully we can discuss some of those in the future. So are words real? Do they properly represent things as they exist in reality? Well, I would argue that most of them represent things as we experience reality. But there are many words that we do want to properly represent things as they exist in reality, especially in the context of describing things that exist in nature. And the best thing that you can do for yourself is to always think critically about the language that you and everybody else uses. It's all about understanding the words we use within context. So remember that quote from the beginning of the video.
Words are but symbols for the relations of things to one another and to us. Nowhere do they touch upon absolute truth.
Use that as motivation to always be willing to accept change and to explore the reality of the words we use. And that concludes today's video. I want to give a personal shout out to Michael Stevens from Vsauce. I wish I had the words to truly describe how much it meant to me that you'd be a part of one of my videos, so thank you so much, Michael. So I wanted to use this video as a resource and a springboard over future discussions pertaining to the last section of this video. So expect a video from time to time that discusses the reality of particular words in a bit more context in the future. My question for you guys is, what are your thoughts over the reality of words? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And with all that said and done, my name's Dale, this is ThinkFact, and remember, never stop learning and thinking. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, that would help me out, and feel free to check out some of my other content. Over the facts and thoughts that almost everybody missed. Have a good one.